Why do you keep attracting victims, right? Why do you continue attracting people who hold you responsible for something that you shouldn't be responsible for? Hey, my name is Anya, and I'm the author of this book right here. I am a book on your relationship with the reality that you create and how to interrupt even the most stubborn patterns by finding the consciousness that is shared. So in psychology, right, we look at the roles people play. We try to find people who are not playing that other separate opposite role. But in consciousness work, we examine the consciousness that is shared by everyone who's participating in the pattern. We undo that consciousness in us, release it, and then the pattern changes. So when one initially looks at their pattern, sometimes they can't see that they share anything with people that they're attracting, especially victims. People who turn on their suffering mode right in front of you. People who believe that the world is responsible for their well-being. People who, whether you want it or not, whether they're kind about it or not, end up in a kind of dynamic with you where you are at fault, directly or indirectly, for their suffering. And by the way, obviously, because I'm talking about this, I have been through this. This has been a big pattern in my family. It's something I lived, and I want to say that it's absolutely something you can transcend in yourself, and you can become the change you wish to see in the world. Let me tell you how it worked for me. Obviously, in identity work, we always take responsibility for our own consciousness first, right? And in the book, I describe how to do it, and I describe the difference between taking ownership of your life versus taking responsibility for somebody else's action, which is really, really important and helps you let go of that resistance. So when I first began doing this work, it was pretty obvious to me that I savored stories of suffering. I savored stories where I might not have been portraying myself as a victim, but I was definitely portraying myself as somebody who endured great suffering and challenges and somehow came out on top. Now, there's nothing wrong with those stories, but the psychological investment we have, right, in them does show us if our own consciousness is caught up in somewhat of a victim identity. So at first it was pretty obvious, and mind you, I began doing this work because the kind of victimhood I saw on the opposite side of my patterns was like, oh boy, I don't really like this. So I'm going to work on it, I'm going to own it in me. And I started noticing that even when people would praise me, I would introduce some sort of story of suffering just to, in my feeling, create a balance in the story. Or if my brother called me, for example, and asked me how I was doing, it was really hard for me to say everything is amazing. I would have to say everything is amazing, but blah, blah, blah. The time went on, things shifted, but then I noticed there was still a big pattern of attracting personal relationships, personal patterns. Somebody still was like suffering on the other end or holding me responsible, even though I was clearly not responsible for their suffering. So when I did identity work and this, I saw that it went a lot deeper into my relationship to power, right? How I saw men, how I saw women, how I saw my own kids. Personally, I always saw myself as a powerful one, right? In the dynamic as a strong one. But then the pattern that you continue attracting is like a lab test. It cannot help but tell you what the state of consciousness is. And I realized that my state of consciousness wasn't shifting very much in this department, even though I was being, enlightened and empowered. If you think about it, we look at life, we look at what we continue attracting into our reality as kind of a lab test. No matter what we tell our doctor about our diet, about our lifestyle, the lab test is a lab test. This is what it is. It's reality. And it's not necessarily our fault, right? Like there could be a genetic component, this kind of component. But if we want a different result, we have to look at reality. And my reality was that there was a lot of blame, a lot of suffering that I saw out there. And I did not see myself part of it. But when it really came down to it, and I dug really, really deep and did identity work, so while I saw myself as powerful, powerful over everything, my own consciousness, discipline, all kinds of stuff, I saw myself powerless over their powerlessness because of my history, because of addiction in my family, because of how people left this planet and I couldn't do anything about it in my formative years. I assumed that ultimately there's nothing I can do if you choose to hurt yourself, right? Or you choose to do something that is going to hurt you, and then as a consequence would disconnect me from being loved by one person or one family or one group that I really want to be a part of. So instead of an identity that spelled out victimhood, right? Victimhood was always out there. But my part of the dance, my part of the shared consciousness, looked like responsibility, carrying everybody's burdens, right? Feeling responsible for what I'm not responsible for. And in some ways, if I really then got honest about it, also holding others responsible for certain things in my life, and thriving, like I often talk about, letting a little bit of steam out on complaining, on suffering in front of somebody, on choosing the state of being in my mind, on my walks, that is suffering. So when you do this work and undo this investment your consciousness has in a shared dynamic of pointing fingers, and pointing fingers because of the shared assumption that something is going to happen, something bad is going to occur if you don't, then you will see your life and your circumstances change, and you see your own experience change. So check out this book if you are attracting unwanted patterns, unwanted behaviors, if you're attracting the same type of person into your experience, or dealing with any other pattern, right? You can begin anywhere, and it's going to bring you right to the center of your consciousness because it affects everything. So check this book out. It is available here on TikTok Shop as a paper version. If you like to listen to your books or read them on your phone, there are also options, but the paper version is available here on TikTok Shop.